2 years later, the 9/11 Commission issued its final report with several recommendations for intelligence reform that were hastily accepted by the President and Congress, and the result was the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act of 2004. The greatest critique of the intelligence community was its distributed structure and the resulting failure to share intelligence and connect the dots in the days, weeks, months, and years leading up to the September 11 attacks. Responsibility and accountability were too diffuse, the Commission wrote, of the pre-9/11 intelligence community. A smart government, the Commission continued, would integrate all sources of information to see the enemy as a whole. It was easy to be sympathetic with the Commission's argument because responsibility for intelligence is spread over 16 agencies and 8 different departments. Of course, many of the agencies have specialized missions. Simplistically, the CIA focuses on foreign intelligence, while the FBI focuses on domestic. The Defense Intelligence Agency provides actionable intelligence for combat support, while the Air Force Intelligence provides aerial reconnaissance and surveillance. The National Geospatial Intelligence Agency watches Earth from space, and the National Reconnaissance Office watches space from the Earth. However, in the event of catastrophic intelligence failure, 9/11 being one of the most dramatic of many examples in our history, it is hard for the President, Congress, and the American people to hold anybody accountable. Nobody possessed the necessary authority to coordinate these agencies, to require intelligence sharing, or to synthesize all available intelligence sources. President Bush followed 3 of the 9/11 Commission's recommendations, using executive orders he better coordinated intelligence and database sharing between the agencies, and through the Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, he created a centralized interagency National Counterterrorism Center and a Director of National Intelligence with support of specialized mission managers, tasked with heading the intelligence community, overseeing the National Intelligence Program, and acting as a principal advisor to the President and his councils. As head of the intelligence community, the Director is responsible for establishing objectives and priorities, ensuring maximum availability and access to intelligence information, developing and ensuring the execution of an annual budget. The list goes on and on. It's a very long list of responsibilities. The 16 agencies, however, remain in their traditional chains of command, within 8 different departments. The Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Prevention Act, in other words, created only a weak Director of National Intelligence with much responsibility and only limited authority, a job fit for James Forrestal. As we close the door on a George W. Bush presidency, we are left with strong institutions at different stages of development to manage most of the major components of our national security. A State Department, courtesy of the Founding Fathers, to handle foreign affairs. A Defense Department, courtesy of Truman, to handle military affairs. And a Homeland Security Department, courtesy of Bush, to handle domestic affairs. Truman and Bush established policy coordinating bodies in the White House, the National Security Council and the Homeland Security Council, to draw these departments together with the President and his principals to formulate national policy. All told, our national security apparatus has a $645 billion price tag today, a full 2/3 of our annual discretionary spending. This, by the way, puts the current financial bailout in perspective. We're spending less on national security today than we are on bailing out Wall Street and AIG. Of course, the $645 billion for national security does not include supplemental war funding, not included in the budget, for hurricane recovery and for wars, for which we spent an additional $215 billion in fiscal year 2008. Despite the price tag, we do not yet have a strong institution to provide national intelligence. I'd like to close by taking a look at this last unfinished work. In 1948, President Truman complained that the National Security Act fails to provide for a fully responsible official with authority adequate to meet his responsibility, whom the President and Congress can hold accountable. History is prologue. In 2002, President Bush's Homeland Security Act put a rubber stamp on Truman's approach to national security reform, creating stronger institutions to manage its component parts. Yet in 2004, President Bush and Congress stopped short of creating a full-scale cabinet-level Department of National Intelligence, instead opting for a much weaker institution with more limited authority over the intelligence community. Donald Rumsfeld and the Department of Defense fought hard to retain their intelligence turf, including 7 of the 16 agencies that make up the intelligence community, and Rumsfeld won out, and President Bush preserved existing chains of command. 2 months after taking the job in February 2007, Mike McConnell complained to the New York Times about his incredibly taxing job and his lack of adequate authority for the tasks at hand. As in 1947, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and National Book Award-winning author Tim Weiner writes, "The new czar was given responsibility without commensurate authority." We know that in the world we live in, good intelligence is absolutely vital. 9/11 only reminded us of that fact. We don't have a great track record in the United States. Several of us at the Hauenstein Center had an opportunity to meet with Tim Weiner 2 weeks ago, and you can read his book, Legacy of Ashes, for a complete explication of intelligence failures, but here are a few. In 1949, the Soviet Union exploded an atom bomb, ending a monopoly on the technology held by the United States and its allies. We didn't see it coming. In 1962, Soviets began installing medium-range missiles in Cuba, capable of striking the U.S. A U-2 plane discovered the installations late in the game. In 1979, we missed 80,000 Soviet troops marching into Afghanistan. More recently, in 1991, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait caught us off guard. Now, of course, the usual defense of the intelligence branch is that only the failures are reported, and there's probably some truth to that. A nation that wants to project its power beyond its borders, writes Weiner, needs to see over the horizon to know what is coming, to prevent attacks against its people. It must anticipate surprise. Instead, in the 20th century and in the early years of the 21st, we were forced time and again to react to surprise. Harry Truman recognized the need to strengthen the Secretary of Defense after the National Security Act of 1947, and he made the necessary reforms within 2 years. I suspect that if we experience the misfortune of another 9/11 type attack on our soil in the coming decades, we will see a similar strengthening of the Director of National Intelligence, perhaps even the creation of a cabinet-level department. But we must recognize that federal institutions are at best a partial solution, especially since several of the institutions we've covered this morning aren't functioning quite in the way that they were expected to. Together, we Americans face more fundamental challenges in the coming decades. In K-12 education, there's just no question anymore that in this century, not only do we need to graduate a higher percentage of our students, we need to graduate them with skills necessary to survive in a global economy. Yes, that means math and science, but it also means training in multiple foreign languages and in cultural competencies. Because not only does the up-and-coming generation have to compete with the rest of the world, it has to cooperate. Guess what? These skills are also vital for raising the next generation of spies. In higher education, this training needs to continue and specialize. When we sat down with Tim Weiner a few weeks ago, he suggested the creation of a national intelligence university to teach global affairs broadly, but also to specialize narrowly in specific regions, nations, languages, religions, and cultural and ethnic groups, as well as in the methods of intelligence gathering, interpretation, and communication. In the news media and in our lives, we need to be more attuned to events in all parts of the globe. When David Long, a Foreign Service veteran and former State Department official, visited our campus just yesterday, he said that no American media outlet can come even close to competing with the BBC in reporting of international affairs. Being the dominant power on our continent in the 20th century, with vast oceans separating us from the European and Asian powers, had many advantages for the United States. A culture of willful ignorance of much of the rest of the world in the second half of this century was not one of them. We may well look back 50 years from now and recognize that as important as Truman, Bush, and later institutional reforms were to our national security, none was more important than the recognition that our security depends ultimately on our citizenry. Thank you.